The creation account in Genesis 1 is distinct from and contradicts the creation account in Genesis 2 and 3. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. Yesterday I made a video where I pointed out that Genesis 4 is likely a separate and distinct tradition from Genesis 2 and 3, and that at some point they were brought together. And the earliest audiences of this new narrative would have just come up with some hermeneutic techniques for harmonizing the two so that they could stay together and be interpreted as a single continuous narrative. And there's a very similar story going on with Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3. Most scholars think that Genesis 2 and 3, or more specifically, Genesis 2:4 through to the end of Genesis 3, was written earlier, somewhere toward the end of the 8th or at some point in the 7th century BCE. And then the priestly creation account, as it's known, or the account that runs from Genesis 1:1 through to the first half of Genesis 2:4, was likely written later, around the end of the 6th or somewhere in the 5th century BCE. And the group that composed this text was probably trying to correct, replace, or supersede the earlier creation account. And there are a number of reasons scholars think this. There are things that are being fixed in the second creation account. And probably the most glaring example is the fact that in Genesis 2, God sees that a part of their creation is not good and then has to go about trying to fix it, but it takes multiple tries. They fail in their first attempt to try to provide a suitable companion for the human when they create animals and the human does not find a suitable companion among them. In the priestly creation account that was written later, God creates everything and immediately sees that it was good. And there are a handful of different ways that Genesis 1 seems to be improving on the story in Genesis 2. And at some point, an editor, a transcriber, someone put the two of them together on the same scroll. And again, later readers would come up with hermeneutic techniques for harmonizing the two accounts so that they could be read as one continuous narrative. But in reality, they were two independent narratives that told very different stories of creation. And if we want to take the texts seriously, we need to read them in isolation from the competing narratives. We need to understand them on their own terms, because when we try to harmonize them, we impose a unifying framework on them to generate an entirely new and distinct interpretation that has nothing to do with how either texts were originally intended to be understood and how they were originally understood. That's not taking the text seriously. That is taking dogmas seriously and altering what the texts were trying to do. And the fit for this video has been Get Low by Maimonides Nuts.